Hi, everyone, and welcome to another G News podcast. Today, we're joined by Rachel Brooking, who is Labour's spokesperson for the environment, resource management, food safety, and space. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Let's start by talking a little bit about you. You are the elected member for Dunedin, having beaten Michael Woodhouse by nearly 8,000 votes in the 2023 election. And you have very strong ties to Dunedin, having grown up there, gone to kindergarten, primary, secondary, and university. You have double degrees in ecology and law. You've practiced law for over 20 years, specialising in the environment, environmental law, resource management, and local government law. That's right. And you've previously been working in the Office of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and you were appointed to a government panel that was charged with reviewing the Resource Management Act. You've also previously been the chair of the Resource Management, the branch, the Otago Southland branch of the Resource Management Law Association. And you've previously also been the Minister of Oceans and Fisheries, among many other things. You come from what I'd call a academic family, with an academic parent, and it's all pretty impressive. So I was wondering if you could tell our audience a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Well, it's a deep dive you've done there. Thank you. Yes, I did do my ecology and law degrees in Dunedin because I wanted to do environmental law. So I was lucky with my academic there. We had a colleague, an American colleague, who asked me when I was 16 what I was interested in at school, and I explained, and she said, why don't you do a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Laws and do this new thing called environmental law? So I did. And so my dad's a historian, a New Zealand historian, taught at the university since I was a baby. And my mother's became an academic as well. She was a school teacher and then moved into Teachers College, and it merged with the university. So she's really big on children's literacy. That's where she comes from. And behind me, I've got a picture of my grandmum, who she was my mother's mother and was really crucial to raising me. None of my family's from Dunedin. My parents moved here when I was a baby, and then both my parents are only children, so my grandmother moved to be just around the corner, which was great. And then her, as a kid, growing up in Dunedin, and I've got a brother, and now I live in my house here, which looks like it's got purple carpet. It's not actually purple, it's grey, with my husband and some of my three children. I've got a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 14-year-old, and we have a puppy. So excuse me if you're a little puppy noises.
That's great. Let's talk about the RMA. And specifically, you've worked in resource management in that field for probably about 25 years. So could you step us through some of the work that you've done and the reforms that Labor made by splitting the old law into two new laws, and how the National Party, after all of that work, which took ages, I believe, of good consulting and proper process, suddenly just repealed that law and took us all back to the original law that we all agreed we wanted to change. And then what has happened to the RMA now?
Okay. So back in the day when I was the branch RMLA chair in Dunedin, so that's the Resource Management Law Association, we had a conference circa 2014, I think. And at that time, everyone was talking about the role of the RMA and whether or not it just needed some really big fixes to it. So that's the position that Sir Geoffrey Palmer's been advocating for a long time, or if it needed something more substantial. But Labor got into government in the 2017 term, and David Parker was the Minister for the Environment. So he said, right, I'm going to have an expert panel to really look at this, and they'll be given a very big brief to look at the whole resource management system, not just parts of the RMA, because National under Nick Smith had done that a few times, but the groups that were looking at the issues were quite constrained by what they could look at. So David Parker had this group with Tony Randerson, was the chair, Justice Tony Randerson. He was a retired Court of Appeal judge, but he had also been involved back in the 1990s. So the Labor changed to a national government in the 1990 election, and Sir Geoffrey Palmer and others had drafted up the Resource Management Bill. And then Simon Upton came in as the National Party Minister for the Environment. So he got a review done of that bill, and they changed a couple of things, a substantive change in the purpose, but mainly remained. And one of the people who did that review in between those governments was Tony Randerson. Fast forward to 2019, from 1990, and Tony Randerson's involved again, along with Rowan Peart, who lots of your watchers might know from the Environmental Defence Society, Amelia Lindsay, and Kevin Prime, who's from Northland, Amelia's at Becker, and Dean Kipton, who's in charge of AT. So a mix of people and backgrounds. And so what we opened up for consultation, and we were very open-minded of whether or not there should be the RMA, just with some amendments, or whole new pieces of legislation, and whether the legislation should be broken up into this idea of a Planning Act and Environment Act. We said, the Randerson Review said, right, we need a new act, not just the RMA being fixed up. It's so broken, it will just get more and more convoluted if you keep trying to fix it. Start again. But we don't need to split up the planning from the environment, which is what some other countries do and what national is suggesting split up. However, we also said spatial planning is really, really important, and doing that long-term planning out for 30 years, that's not a regulatory plan. So it's a high-level plan that says this is a region, so most of our reforms were based on regions, like what are we going to do in the next 30 years? Where are the areas that are suitable for building? Where are the areas that aren't? And those areas where it makes sense to build, what infrastructure do we need there? So the idea was to pull together both local government and central government, along with Ministry to do those spatial plans. So the Randerson report also suggested a third act, and that's to do with climate adaptation, and where there are existing activities in places where they're not going to be forever because of climate change, that there's a way to try and work out how to, as fairly as possibly, make sure that people have somewhere else to live. So it was 3 different pieces of legislation, which is quite different to what this government is suggesting now, which is 2 pieces, one being a Planning Act based on the enjoyment of private property rights. Not exactly what that means. It could mean all sorts of things. And at the worst end of the spectrum, it could mean that if any environmental protection is ever put on anyone's land, then either ratepayers or taxpayers have to pay compensation for that, which would really mean that ratepayers don't have any money, so there'd be no environmental protections. That's at the worst side of it. There's, of course, a spectrum, and there's already room for compensation in the Resource Management Act already. So it's a big worry there. Also, how they're talking about the environment as being quite separate from urban environments. Depends how the different pieces of legislation talk to each other. If they talk to each other well and you still have integrated management, what the RMA has, then that's a good thing. But if they're totally separate and you're always trying to argue about whether something is planning or environment, then that's
Great. Okay, so the National Party, they just ripped it all apart. They came in and I think it was December 2023. I think they just pulled it all out after all that work.
Yes, it was. We're like, what are they going to do? Surely they're not going to repeal all of it. So what they've done, they did repeal both of them. They kept a little bit of the fast track from the Natural and Built Environment Act. So that was the RMA replacement, was the Natural and Built Environment Act. And then there was the Spatial Planning Act as well, which was separate. So they got both of those, and that meant that they went back to the Resource Management Act. Since then, they've been doing little choppy changes to the Resource Management Act, changing some of the regulations, and at the moment they're consulting on changing more of the regulations. Some of those little changes have been to undermine environmental protections for freshwater, and then in the piece of legislation that's just been reported back from the Select Committee, some of it is to take bits of the Natural and Built Environment Act and put them in the resource management. So some useful things in terms of making it certainty to existing infrastructure for reconsenting, to have stronger enforcement provisions, to have a bit stronger hazards provisions, but not as strong as they need.
Okay. Well, fast track consenting, that's kind of related. There's a whole background to this area, and some of it relates to COVID fast tracking and national, basically taking Labor's ideas in COVID, and but then using a schedule to slip in all sorts of things around the environmental protections that we normally have. Could you comment on the distinction between Labor's fast tracking and the pretty sketchy lawmaking that the Nats have undertaken here? The private benefits in public law, the purpose, of the law now excluding protecting the environment, and even things like who gets to select who goes on these panels in fast tracking. So what is the current state of things?
There's lots of questions in there, so if I forget to answer them, do remind me.
Okay.
Yeah, so Labor had two fast tracks. The first fast track was during COVID, as you say, and it was to get those shovel-ready projects done. It still had an environmental twist in it, and then as did the second Labor fast track, which was in the Natural and Built Environments Act. And the reason for the second fast track was an acknowledgement that the RMA is broken, and it was going to, even with now law reforms, it was going to take some time for the new laws to transition in. So the idea was that you have a course that transitioning over a number of years happens. What National's fast track does is it says in the purpose of the Act, it says to facilitate projects. And it doesn't say in accordance with sustainable management. There's no test like sustainable management in there. And then the architecture of the rest of the Act is all to give the greatest weight to the purpose being to facilitate project. So that's a crucial problem with this piece of legislation. Other things that are vast, such as Labor's fast track, is that it enables prohibited activities, so activities that are under the resource management plan says no, you can't even apply for to do something. This is so not used that often, but it's often used in hazard areas to stop this major hazard, or like zero plans on the country. Now, under this fast track, you can apply for consent for activity. You can also apply for consent for activities that have already been declined through the whole process. So lots of the media talk about these as zombie projects. So those are really bad as well. Plus, no community groups get NA apart from councils and some iwi groups where there's pretty settled. Very, very, very constrained. The David Carter's COVID fast track legislation was also quite constrained in what community groups could be involved, but they specifically named groups like Forest and Bird and like the business, those sorts of groups that would really provide with a wide range of community interests in the project. Probably not perfect, but better than nothing, and that's what we've got with this act. And then what happened is it did go through its process at Select Committee, but the projects weren't named. And so at the committee stage of the bill, so that is after the Select Committee has finished its job, after there's any opportunity for a submission, the schedule got introduced in the committee stage with all the 131 named projects. So I asked the clerk at that time whether this was appropriate given that it was a government general bill, which means there shouldn't be any private benefit for any specified person. The clerk advised that it shouldn't be included in the bill, and then the Speaker of Government called the clerk. So why the argument about the specific benefit is that some of those companies listed, including encouragees, would never be able to get consent through a normal resource management process. Because they're named in this bill, there's okay, seems to me to be a direct benefit. Anyway, we got overruled on that one, and so those projects are now proceeding. And what they do is they have to submit to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority, and they set up a period. So a person is appointed, or a judge, and they make the decide. And one of the changes that went through with the was a bill, or it was an act, was that the panelists can define an act. However, they have to give the greatest weight to the purpose, which is the project. So we're not sure what weight that will carry yet with any of the panelists. Of course, we haven't any of those panelists actually yet with the decision, although they are being projects. And it is said the Environmental Defence Society, EDS systems, will work with the EPA to make sure that those documents are available on the EPA's website. So if anyone's interested in any of those projects, if they're happening near you, then do look at the EPA's website to see how the project is working. They're all going at different time frames.
Yeah, that's very comprehensive. Thank you. Now, I know this is not really your area, but I was going to talk a little bit about oceans and fisheries because you used to be the minister in that area. And when you were, you announced that the government would create 6 new marine reserves between Timaru and the Catlins in the Lower South Island. Plus, you'd worked on the Hauraki Marine Protection Bill, and now, as I understand it, those reserves have been delayed due to complexity, and the Hauraki Marine Protection Bill has also been delayed due to what I understand was a late amendment made by, I think it was NZ First. Could you tell us what happened here and a bit about the disturbing legislative processes where major amendments have been made by this government after Select Committee that also have associated private interests attached to them?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the Southeast Marine Protection Area.
Sure.
Here. So that had a forum started in 2014 under the national government with a whole lot of different fishing interests, iwi interests, conservation interests, and that forum worked through. So I was the minister just April 2023 until the new government was formed. So it was really great to work with the Minister of Conservation then for the time to get that with the minister will sign off on those areas. Product Golf, that legislation, again, it's great to work with Widow Jean Prime. She was the Minister of Conservation, it came from the Minister of Conservation. So we introduced that bill for first reading with the elections. And as you know, the new government took it on and it went through the Select Committee, and the Select Committee reported that unanimously on the bill. Some small changes, but reported back all in favour of continuing with the bill. That was over a year ago now. So I had a little trip to your beautiful island and into the Gulf, but we haven't seen the words of it. And that announcement was some time ago, and we're told by fishing industry people that it'll be very benign. It won't have very much environmental effect. In fact, I was asking Minister Shane Jones about this in the estimates hearings a couple of weeks ago, and he said, well, he didn't need to take advice on this issue. He he could work it out himself that it was going to have minimal environmental impact. He wasn't interested in anyone else's opinion. And it's just really problematic. It's like, maybe it is a tiny environmental impact, but it would be good for somebody to know, one, exactly what's been suggested, and two, some independent person who knows about these things to be able to say, yes, it's a minor impact or it's not. But we haven't had that. Last time I spoke to Priyanka, the minister hadn't reached out to her to show her a draft of the amendment paper or anything like that. So what we think is going to happen is eventually the bill will have its second reading. And then after that second reading, again in this committee stage, so this is the committee stage of the House, we're talking about it. This is when, if anyone who watches Parliament TV, when the minister sits on the table in front of where the speaker is, and we all pop up and we can say, Madam Chair or Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and we might be able to ask the minister questions. So it's not a timed debate, it's just as long as we've got new content to ask about, then it keeps going. And we can suggest amendments as well. But we expect when that stage happens that the Minister, Jane Jones, will put up an amendment paper to enable the machine that the bill at the moment doesn't provide for. And we think that maybe some of the delay at the moment is because these might be specified official people, and as I noted before, government bills aren't supposed to ever be about specific individuals or companies. You can have legislation that does that, but that needs to be in the form of a private bill, which is a specific
Yes.
bill.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what, and it's just terrible lawmaking to do all these huge amendments at that stage. We've got another one in front of the Environment Committee, the Resource Management Consenting Systems Amendment Bill that's been reported back. Massive changes there around housing from when submission happened that the Select Committee did see them and did report back on, and we were able to ask advisors questions about. But then we keep hearing announcements from the minister that he's going to add in a whole lot more things at the committee stage. And again, this is like us estimates if he was going to in those changes back to Select Committee, because you can do that. You can open up for another week or two of submissions and ask your special people that you know a lot about the topic to submit on it. No, we're just totally bypassing that process by adding in these changes at the committee stage. They did this in another resource management bill to stop the Otago Regional Council from notifying their plan, their environmental plan, the day before they were going to do it. It's just a horrible abuse of process. Often these things are done in urgency as well, but not always. And we might talk later as well about all stages urgency and this government's use of that.
There's a lot of us that are really aware of the bad processes that are being deployed by the national-led government at the moment, and the way that it's really abusing good lawmaking at the same time as trying to boast that it's about to improve it. But just talking about running down things and undermining protections in the environment, the Ministry for the Environment, the EPA, DOC, they've all been pretty defunded and had a lot of people go. And this is undermining things like freshwater and the protections for the national environment. And it's kind of been a feature of this government as it sort of brings sort of things like property rights in over the top of the environment. We've recently learned that predator-free 2050 has been disestablished and that function's going back into DOC. But at the same time, DOC are laying off people and I think, it's kind of like operating on a bit less money. Could you talk about what's going on with Predator 2050 and concerns about funding that you've been hearing or seeing?
Yeah. So I sit on the Environment Committee with our conservation spokesperson, and we were very surprised when she pointed out that just a couple of days before the budget, within the week before the budget, the minister was speaking about his strategies for what he wanted Predator 2050 Limited to be doing. And then, next minute, we're in the budget and they've been just established. So everybody was very surprised about that, I think, including the minister, which just goes to show really what little regard any of the environmental ministers have in this, or the rest of the government has for those sorts of ministers. And so, yeah, we were very surprised to see that come through in the budget. But it is, as you say, consistent with all of these decreases in funding and funding for things like community hubs, environmental community hubs, that was before. The People being able to bring legal cases for the environment, a lot of the work that community was doing, environmental organisations was cut as well. And meanwhile, in the second of the budget 2024, the waste levy has been opened up to be able to be spent on a whole lot of things that aren't waste and aren't related to waste minimisation. And Labour was okay with that for things like old landfills that are the nasty things that the waste levy going towards that sort of remediation seems like a fair thing to be doing. But now the waste levy can go to anything to do with the environment. So the fertiliser runs off into the river, and then river protection because of the nutrient build up in the river, then that waste levy can be used for those environmental things. Important, good environmental things, but it's really making the waste levy be used to for the cuts that have come funding for the environment, which is it's terrible. But meanwhile, we now hear that the census is going, not sure what statistics related to the environment. There's talk of merging the environment ministry with Metsport and MHUD, which are very urban-focused ministries, and whilst opinions on the makeup of different ministries, I do have a strong opinion that the Ministry for the Environment has to do its work in providing policy advice to protect the environment and to improve the environment, as well as all the monitoring it does in the environment as well. It's really important, and any move away from that is bad. And of course, the ministry is meant to love its programs because of its purpose.
The Wildlife Amendment Bill. The High Court recently decided it was unlawful for the Department of Conservation to authorise the killing of wildlife unless there was a direct link between killing and protecting wildlife. And I just want to ask, has Tama Potaka's new amended law made it legal to kill protected native species, including the kiwi, for example? What's this really all about?
Yeah, well, good question. And I say that because I was very confused when the bill came before the House. And you'd think that the minister would be able to explain it properly. But what we heard was all of the government MPs doing speeches that said, not a lot here, I would say, but they all basically said, hooray, this bill will mean that we can build a big new road near my electorate. What lots of the speeches said, and it won't be slowed down. And then when we asked questions about the bill and the hierarchy of considerations in it, we really refused to answer and got confused answers. And then we went through all stages of urgency, and the minister wasn't really answering some quite complex questions about it, and all of the government speeches ended up being totally confused. And it's just terrible lawmaking. And the problem isn't fixed for those big new roads. So if you're asking the minister, where is your amendment? Are you going to put an amendment through all stages of urgency to fix this problem? I was very confused, and just not how long should be made whatsoever.
It's a total shambles, isn't it, really? That's what's really happening. Climate change and magical future tech. Future tech that may or may not help us reach our climate goals. And We've also got the ETS doing all the heavy lifting according to the current government, but it's only applying to roughly half the problem. That's leaving out agriculture, and they've stopped all the real decarbonisation, haven't they? They've stripped budgets of real carbon emissions reduction projects and work. So could you comment on how this magical thinking probably puts farmers and maybe the wider economy at risk if we're just to let it sort of run the way it is?
Yeah, sure. This firstly acknowledge my colleague Russell, who's now our climate spokesperson, and before her was Megan Woods a long time ago. So I work closely with both of them on these issues related. So for climate change, I think it's always really useful to think about the different gases, and we do have a split gas approach in New Zealand. Strangely, some people are always pulling for a split gas approach in climate groups, but we do already have it. So we do think about carbon differently from methane. We have different targets in that Act for carbon, so that's the carbon zero in 2050, and then a 24 to 47, I think it was wrong for methane. So methane in New Zealand is biological methane from animals, and we had the first emissions reduction plan as well. Yeah, sorry, too many letters here. But the emissions reduction plan had looked across our society and sectors at where we could do our best investments to reduce emissions. Transport is a really big one. I think almost 50% of our carbon emissions are from transport. So electrifying fleets, but also using public transport, using active transport, getting more things on trains. These are all really good ways to reduce those carbon emissions. And then the methane, there was this big conversation to try and work out what to do about pricing methane emissions. So these are from the animals in particular, big part of New Zealand's emissions profile, which is really weird internationally. We have a very different profile from most other countries, in part because we're not a heavily industrialised country. We have to do a lot of work in New Zealand is because we chop down all our trees. That's
That I've read that you have a very special interest in legislative processes and the ones undertaken in Parliament. And could you talk to us about some of the poor lawmaking that you've seen under this government? For example, like some pretty lazy repealing of laws, muddled drafts coming, being presented, and these sudden late amendments that suddenly pop out of the woodworks, all under urgency. This kind of slapdash lawmaking, I guess I'd call it, because I see it evident in the Hansard. Whenever you're challenging them, it pops up all the time. What's your experience been like?
This must be very boring Hansard reading for you there. My hair out over and over again. No, and a particular bee in my bonnet is the use of urgency, all stages urgency, or urgency at a committee stage when you're introducing new big government amendments. So people say, oh, well, Labour used urgency too. And that's true. But there are different ways of doing urgency. So all stages urgency is when us, as members of Parliament, see the bill when the minister steps up to start speaking. We saw that with the pay equity. This I think is amazing. We were on a Tuesday. We were in our caucus meeting. It was at 10:30, and they got 12:30 in the morning. Brooke Van Golden, the minister, she did a press conference at 11 a.m. or thereabouts when we were in our caucus meeting. No one had got the note, and we were told at the end of caucus, there's some urgent legislation that's something to do with workers' rights. And a protest is happening. So the protesters were out on the lawn pretty much by the time we got out of our caucus committee and tried to work out what was going on, and we had all that we had was what she had said in the press conference. Then we go into the house and we make a question time at 2 o'clock, and still we don't have the bill on us and nothing, and then or something else happens. But then we get moved into urgency. We go into urgency, the minister stands up, and then the House officers come in and they put the bill on the table. So we scurry up, get the bill off the table as the minister is speaking, and then the first Labour speaker up has to respond. So we do the first reading and then go through the second reading. So these are all time debates, and then go into the committee stage, which is when you get questions and so what a terrible way to make laws.
It's a terrible shocker, isn't it? I mean, it should have been headlines all over the place. There was about, I think, 2 weeks on the pay equity travesty, which I think is like theft of $12.8 billion from low income workers, mostly women in New Zealand, that the government was also in a shambles about saying, oh, well, look, it's saving the budget. Oh, no, it's not. It's nothing to do with the budget. And, it's just the public aren't idiots. They can sort of see that it's a circus, right? It's a circus of chaos going on all the time. And this repeats. It repeats all the time in a lot of laws, and it's pretty shoddy stuff.
But also, you can do, so we did do all stages urgency, and some of it is always budget all stages urgency. So that happens, and we accept that, although it shouldn't extend into non-budget issues. But Labour also did all stages urgency for emergencies, and there was COVID and cyclone.
That's right.
But most, not all, but most of those pieces did have a post-enactment review, and that should always be the case. If there's actually a need for all stages urgency, there's an emergency, then of course that should be able to happen. But you need a mechanism to go and check that when people have time and things have settled down and actually this isn't doing exactly what we intended to. We need to go back and fix it. Or we're clever drafters, we've got it all right. Fine. Move on.
Right. Lastly, let's just talk about Dunedin. What's actually happening in Dunedin? You've got Dunedin Hospital and fewer beds, I guess, and other issues. So what are you working on with regard to issues that are important to people in Dunedin?
Yes, well, certainly the hospital is very important. And I'll just explain that for anyone in the North Island. There's basically two tertiary hospitals in the South Island. So if Dunedin didn't have a tertiary hospital, then it probably wouldn't be able to train up all of the med students in the med school that we have here. Because Dunedin is fundamentally a university. So not having a tertiary hospital in Dunedin would be a disastrous thing. And that seemed to be what the government was suggesting for a wee while, and may still yet, depending on where things get to. So 35,000 people came out onto the streets about that. Other big issues for Dunedin, as I said, it's a university town, and that, and also including our wonderful polytechnic as well. So lots of students move between the two institutions. They've got very close relationships. They're very important and make a wonderful place, because we're only 130,000 people here. But we have, at the moment, we've got a science festival, nature festival, a literary festival, and we have a Fringe festival and an arts festival, and just lots of creative stuff happening in Dunedin. Except we don't have a professional theatre space at the moment, so that's and then we have the problems that everywhere else is as well. Problems with homelessness. It's very, very cold here in winter time, and that's and problems that the rest of the country has with water, then deciding that knock down all these houses and build new ones inside. No, we need to do that. Total madness. And those are probably the main issues in Dunedin. It's a great place to be.
Thank you. It is a great place to be. Thanks very much, Rachel, for today. I'm sure everyone found the conversation interesting, educational, and valuable. So I'd love to have you back again as we proceed towards the election and talk more about these kind of important issues that we've covered today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah,